Okay. So actually I do have some type of synesthesia, which is spatial form synesthesia, and or time form synesthesia. So whenever I think of weeks or days or months or years or centuries, or also how old people are, they have distinct patterns, arrangements in space. So from, let's say, being born until you're 100 years old has a distinct shape, and it's always the same shape, and it doesn't change. And I use these shapes to plan my time and my weeks and my months and my years, and also when I recall memories, they're embedded into these shapes in a sort of abstract 3D way. But the shape is consistent and it doesn't change. But I always thought there's nothing interesting about that until I started studying synesthesia. Well, I thought maybe everybody does it, and I don't have what's typically talked about, which are colors for days or weeks or months. So I have a very colorless experience of time, and also numbers. They have a linear layout, but it's more like a Cartesian coordinate system, and probably because I studied mathematics, it has something to do with that, I think.
I think.
Yeah.
A lot of people with number line can be better at mathematics.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I think that it's definitely, I was always able to visualize math very well. It takes some practice, like anything does, but it was a visual process, like doing calculus and algebra, and but in the same sense, the alphabet is also in a straight line. I mean, whenever I think of the alphabet, it's also in a straight line, and in some sense, it's stemming from the way you've learned it, because I remember learning or seeing in my classroom when I was young on the wall the alphabet from left to right. And I know that some people have knicks or certain other forms to it, but it seems like the most common one is just a straight line. So maybe it's also overlooked by a lot of people that they even have a consistent shape for numbers or for the alphabet or weeks or months or years.
Does your number line turn at particular point?
No, it doesn't for just numbers. It doesn't. It's really like a Cartesian coordinate, like a 3D axes. But for ages, when I think about how old I am or about how old somebody is, then that has a specific shape, and it sort of goes from 0, curving a little bit as you get older, till you reach about mature age, so around 20. And then the line bends there and stays flat till, well, around 100, and sort of stops around 105. I haven't known anybody who's lived longer than 102. I had an aunt who lived that long. So in some sense, it's mostly flat. But as I was growing up, or as people get older, I see that as a sort of curve to the line. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's when I think about it, it's always sort of been like that. Yeah, I can't imagine it not. And the centuries have also a sort of funny configuration. It's like a matrix, but with irregularities that don't make much sense. I mean, there's some inconsistencies in the I guess those are the most interesting. My years are linear, which from top to bottom, and as the year progresses, they move. So whatever's the current year, now is 2012, and so it shifts over in my perspective, not the camera's perspective. So last year is to my left, and the next year is to my right. And December and January are always separated by quite a far distance, and it actually disturbs me a little bit. Like at the end of the year, when it's still December and I have to plan for January, February, there's a constant shift of a reference frame, and it can be a little bit confusing, actually. So it's nice when the year starts over again, because I don't have to worry about December being down here. But I should say that it's a mental image. It's not a projected image. It's not something that I actually would say that I see in the world. It's definitely internal representation, but it's a visual nature. So,
like a associator type.
Yeah, like it's like an associator type, exactly. I'm a projector. A difference between projector and associator would be that a projector projects the image into the external, like the frame of the external world. So the reference frame, like you would expect that if you were driving a car, that the image would get in the way of the road, of seeing the road, and that's maybe an extreme example, but that would be how I would think of like a very strong projector. And for me, it's not like that at all. It's not like a real visual image, but it has visual quality like a memory, like a visual mental image. It's just very consistent. It's not like sometimes December's up here and sometimes it's down. No, it's always in the same spot, always. So, yeah. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to use it to help you do anything, or if that's why I use it, I don't know.
So if it keep changing, it would have no meaning then.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's got to be consistent, I guess, to assign some meaning to it, so...
Tell me a little about your research you're doing.
Okay, yeah. So we do research on, visual memory in general, with specifically like to study synesthesia. And we are currently investigating whether letter and color associations can be learned through reading and color. So we're really interested in to see the effects of the environment, how the environment can sort of imprint your behavior. And why do some people develop grapheme color synesthesia? So why do some people experience all words and letters in color and other people don't? So if we're all exposed to colored letters all the time in the world, I like the example that McDonald's the M is yellow. So why don't all Americans think of M as yellow? Because the McDonald's is everywhere. Or, in general, things are printed in color, and to what extent do we really absorb these associations that we see all the time, and why is it that some people do and some people don't? Is it necessary that you have a genetic predisposition to develop synesthesia, or can it be trained in the absence of synesthetic genes? So maybe in adulthood or since you were a child, if you would read in color, in consistent colors, let's say, since you were a small child and learned how to read, then is it more likely that more people would become synesthetic? In general, what are the effects of training and the environment on our phenomenology and our behavior? It's also interesting to see if reading in color can help overcome dyslexia. Because if a person has a problem processing the written form of a letter, this is processed in it's processed in several areas of the brain, but there's a network in the visual cortex that seems to be special for processing the written form of letters. So if you can bypass this network, maybe there's, with dyslexia, a certain malfunction in that network, and you can go into the color processing network instead, which might function normally, then the person could remember the color instead of the written form of the letter, and in that sense, maybe be able to overcome their own dyslexia by switching the orders of letters, for example. There's many different types of dyslexia, I think, so it might be a little harder to say exactly what's going on there, but it's just one hypothesis that we have. And in general, we also are interested to see if reading in color, so training, can change the structure of your brain. And specifically in the visual areas where you process letters and process words and process color. And this is the area where increased structural connectivity was found in grapheme and color synesthetes themselves. So we're interested to know, well, if we train color-letter associations, can we also actually cause changes in the brain structure and function? and to what extent. So, and that brings us back to the question of, is it really possible for anyone to become synesthetic, or do you really need a genetic predisposition? So if you...
Well, it would be more like you're just learning another language with a different alphabet.
Yeah.
And just instead of shapes and letters, it's just simple blocks of color.
Yeah.
And just spell out words in blocks of color.
Yeah, so the letter still has a shape, the form of its own letter. So that would also be interesting to replace the letter itself with just a color. That would actually be very, very interesting.
And that can be learned with practice, just like this is a new alphabet to replace English, and maybe a dyslexic mind will process the sequence of colors better than the sequence of letters.
Right. Yeah.
So some theorize the problem they were having reading letters is that they cannot put the phoneme connection that we may have a hearing problem in a very high frequency range, and they can't distinguish certain sound to attach to the letters, and then trying to read it and connecting to the sound, and they get a bit confused.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think it can go in many different levels, and if you can narrow down sort of the flow of information in each person, I don't think that every dyslexic individual has the same problem, actually. So if you can narrow down, and you know the network of learning and reading and written language and spoken language, then you can better narrow down for the individual at which stage something is going wrong, and then maybe devise even in a per individual, on the individual basis, some kind of constructive therapy, like with colors and words. I lost this last point I was going to say, though. It will come back to me, I think.
Oh,
okay. What was it? Oh, yeah, so I think
Well, how long have you been doing your research so far?
This reading and color research we've been doing for a bit over a year now. So it's very new and exciting, actually. So, and I think that the potential is actually really big, because it's finally something that you can train on for years or months, or and it's sort of a byproduct of the reading. So the learning of the color with the letter, it's not your main focus. Your main focus is to just read, like whatever it is that you're reading. And sort of implicitly you develop these associations. So obviously you're aware that there's color on the page, but it's not your everyday task to remember what these colors are. And that's nice, because you could imagine just reading everything in color since you're a kid, since you're just to see what's really the benefit of an actual long-term training program, more than just a week, where in previous studies, which are very interesting studies, but the participant has to indicate on the computer which color goes with which letter. It's not as engaging for the person. It's time-consuming that they... with reading, you can read whatever you want to read anyway. In addition, you have this sort of effect. So now I remembered what I was going to relate it to. So in our study, we only use 4 letters with 4 colors, so they're high frequency. And with most grapheme color synesthetes, they have usually most, if not all, of the letters have a certain color. It's not always the case, but... many people experience all 26 letters of the alphabet in certain colors and in largely distinct colors. But the first time I tried to print a page with 26 different colors was, it was almost impossible to read. So there are huge differences there already between real synesthesia and something like reading in color, because it's hard for us to even be able to focus on the word when the color is so distracting on the page. And even with 4 high-frequency letters, the page becomes totally colored and colorful, and can also be a little bit distracting, especially at first. And it's very interesting, actually, to this issue about this distracting nature of the colors, because why are synesthetes able to sort of overcome any distraction that might be there, and to what extent are they able to? And if you are experiencing letters and colors all the time, well, how is it that they aren't so distracting that you are unable to read the text? And maybe then we find differences in cognitive control mechanisms between synesthetes and non-synesthetes. And maybe if you do something like reading in color, you actually can train your brain to increase its cognitive control by focusing on the letter or the word and the meaning, and inhibiting the color when necessary. And if necessary, remember the color, but inhibit the letter or the word or the meaning. So I think that there's much going on here. Yeah, very interesting questions.
You think it would be a cool joke to give a grapheme synesthete a text and colored letter with incongruent colors?
Yeah, so I've actually two synesthetes have offered to read for me in color. One said that she has some letters she would prefer to change the colors of. So obviously I wouldn't do it to even try it to do it unless people explicitly state that they would like to, if it happened that their colors would change, that they would be okay with that, and that maybe they should be able to pick their own colors. So I haven't actually been able to do this research yet, but if I find enough synesthetes who have some colors of the alphabet where they wouldn't mind switching around, yeah, then it would be really interesting, because maybe they are more likely to form new connections, or it could be that it's so hardwired in their brains that the new colors won't stick to the letters. It could actually go either way. I'm not really sure how that would turn out. It's quite interesting. Yeah, but I wouldn't do it against their will, and I wouldn't do it if they didn't like the colors. Yeah, because it wouldn't be fair, no. But then you wonder, well, I mean, everything that's printed has colors, you see it everywhere. So if that's the case, why don't some of the colors become overwritten anyway? That's also part of the interesting research question, is if we're bombarded by these letters, is it only because they're inconsistent? If they were consistently colored, if we saw R in blue every single time we saw an R, then are we more likely to develop grapheme color synesthesia? So, yeah, it's a really unknown territory, I think, there. Yeah.
It just seemed hard for some people to even imagine a grapheme synesthete when you see this is in white letters or compared in black letters, and despite the ink it's printed on, they get the same synesthetic response.
Yeah, and that the colors don't normally blend either. You normally hear that if it's a yellow and a yellow print and the synesthetic color is red, you won't get an orange experience out of it. And so there's indication that the brain areas that are processing the real color and the synesthetic color are not overlapping, because there should be blending of colors if that would be the case. That's one idea about it. But yeah, it begs the question of how does the synesthetic brain keep track of what's the real color and what's the synesthetic color, and how can you have a simultaneous experience of two different color? And yeah, how is the brain able to overcome this, and that you don't have in general, that the synesthetes function completely normally in the world, and if not normally, then a little bit better than average on some things. And if it would be detrimental to have conflicting information all the time, you would expect
trying to have everything synchronized.
Right.
See, and that's the thing we're trying to understand, because like you snap a finger, the brain processes the auditory information of the sound before the brain has completed the visual information. So there's a significant lag.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And somehow it has to know the last bit of information and then put it all together.
Together again, yeah. So, it's a similar story within the visual cortex itself. Within the one domain of vision, the brain processes visual information in parallel, so it splits up features and processes them in separate networks. So you have line segments, contrast, motion, color, luminance, for example, orientation, all processed in different parts of the brain. And then at some point, the experience that we have is mostly unified. And how does it happen? This is called the binding problem, and it's quite an interesting and old already question in phenomenology and now in neuroscience, because the more we learn about the brain and processing times, we also see that, indeed there is a lag also between stimulus input and conscious recognition of that input. With visual information, it's usually about 200 to 300 milliseconds before you become visually conscious of information, and it's also possible to subliminally present information visually, because if you override the information within the 200 milliseconds, the brain still absorbs the visual information, although it won't reach a conscious level. So it can still affect behavior, for example, reaction times or performance on certain tasks. So, it seems like this problem of how all of our senses become one unified experience still needs to be solved, and that's we're sort of on our way, hopefully, to making some contribution to these questions. Obviously, it's a very big problem, and
the binding problem.
Yeah, the binding problem encompasses a lot of areas, and I think it will be a little while before we